pleasure of meeting Dr. Fran Smith last summer, and she was here for another UDL event. It was with Baltimore County Public Schools that has a grant for UDL, and there were a number of national speakers. And when I saw Fran's presentation, specifically about what she was doing at George Washington University and teaching a graduate course online using UDL, I thought that she would make a wonderful speaker for our own Towson group that's interested. So I know a few things about Fran. Fortunately, we had dinner last night at the Marriott. And I know that she holds a doctorate from George Washington University in higher education administration, but she's had many positions over the years, working with central office, with special education services, all throughout Northern Virginia. Maybe she'll tell a little bit about that. But when I looked up her name on the internet, I came across something where Fran earned a postdoctorate fellowship at Boston College. And so I'm going to read a little bit about that. So Fran Smith earned a doctorate in higher ed administration from George Washington University in 2008. For the past decade, Dr. Smith has explored ways of applying UDL to K-12, career assessment, and post-secondary learning environments. Through her work with the Virginia Department of Education's Training and Technical Assistance Center at Virginia Commonwealth University, and as a technology coordinator and collateral instructional faculty member. Collateral, I don't know, I never heard that before. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe you could tell us. We have adjuncts and we have clinical, but not collateral. Anyway, she was a collateral instructional faculty member in the VCU School of Education. She provided instruction and training emphasizing UDL and worked with other post-secondary faculty on UDL implementation. As a visiting adjunct professor since 2003, she has taught graduate course in UDL at George Washington, as I mentioned, and helped expand online UDL features of this course through the Ohio State University's Faculty Administrative Modules in Education program. Wow. She has also played an active role in the National UDL Task Force based in Washington, D.C., and the IDEA, Partnerships National UDL Community of Practice. That's the federal regulation for special education. At the Center for Applied Special Technology, that's where our January speaker from a year ago, Dr. Rose, he's the head of CAST. At CAST, Dr. Smith will focus on helping develop and coordinate online resources to support post-secondary educators in applying UDL. In addition, she will continue her development of tools to measure the effectiveness of UDL implementation in post-secondary classrooms. Wow. So you can see that she's had a great wealth of experience and is highly qualified, and I know you're going to enjoy meeting her and knowing her and listening to her experiences. Fran Smith.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for the welcome. I am very impressed with what Towson University does, and am thrilled to be here again. It's the kind of institution that I think any educator would want to be a part of for the mission that you're focused on. I am going to try to give you a taste of what I do and what I've done in teaching with UDL, and hopefully share with you some practices that I would suspect complement some of the things some of you do, and maybe they're new things for others, and show you some resources along the way. I have an hour to try to compress what I typically would talk through for hours with people about, but I do have I think it's in your handout, a website that you can go to, and it's called recognizingdifferences.com. I also have posted on UDL Connect, and I'm not sure if that link is in your handouts, but if you're not a member of UDL Connect, there is a group there specifically for today that you can go to, and there's a longer list of resources that you can explore, along with the PowerPoint I'll post there today when I get in transit on the train back to Richmond. This has been an interesting journey to get here. I left my house yesterday morning at 6 in the morning, got to the train at 7, and knew if I didn't leave then I wouldn't get here, and watched the snow. And as I got to the train station in Baltimore and got off, the snow was at least 5 inches at around midday. So we've all seen that as it's grown. But I wanted to take a poll. I usually do a lot of interaction in presentations and have chances for everybody to dialogue and do what I think UDL is all about, is a very energetic approach. But I want to give you a lot of information today, so bear with me if you will. But I just want to take a poll of just kind of clap your hands or stand up and shout what your preference is here. So I'm going to start with the first picture, which is kind of more of what we've all been watching, or this, right? Probably where all of us would like to be right now. And I'm going back to what I'm understanding in the news, lots of snow on the roads in Richmond when I get home tonight. So we don't plow the roads quite as quickly as you do here. I'm going to also try to anchor your prior knowledge in UDL, and I want to poll you again for just my understanding of what you know. I've followed what your colleague, Dr. Liz Berkowitz, has been doing for a while, and it's really wonderful to see, and applaud your efforts because you all are doing great things for the country. But I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. I'm going to show you a number of tools and a number of different situations that I've used UDL and explored UDL in higher education, and hopefully you'll resonate with some of that and leave here with some new information. And then share some current research across what's happening with learning in higher ed and why this is important, or why I think it's important, and I think most of us who are following UDL feel this way. As I appreciate that warm introduction, and gosh, watch what gets on the internet because you don't know what might be there. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Just to tell you though that yes, I did work with VCU. I left there to do my postdoc at Boston, and was very fortunate to be able to work with CAST and Boston College during that year from 2011-12. I was what they call a UDL fellow. So there were actually 8 of us that came and went through a tenure there. Some of the resources I'll show you later in the presentation are part of the beginnings we started doing when I was at CAST, and it's great to see them now at home. I've been fortunate to continue to be working as an adjunct with several universities. George Washington is one I've been with a long time. I have taught a class there in UDL since 2003, which has branched into a number of different formats. I'll show you some of that. I still work with VCU on a project that I'll talk to you about a little later, and I'm currently teaching this semester with the University of Richmond. I believe, even though I teach a course in UDL that is focused on that for graduate studies, I believe UDL is a lens for any course, and I think it's a good lens because it gives us a way of thinking about how we plan our instruction and deliver that. It doesn't mean you have to do everything, but it gives you that opportunity to think about, you know, how that's going to reach learners and the variability we see with learners. So these are some of the places that I've been affiliated with my career. I have also been a practicing vocational evaluator for a number of years, which I started many years ago working with high school students and adults with disabilities and helping them determine what kind of career direction they could go into. And I've been very active in that field as well. Again, that UDL lens has been applied in that work as well. So curious, just for my understanding, where you think you are on this continuum. So are you just a show of hands, do you feel like you're a novice at UDL? You're just beginning, you know what U, D, and L stand for? Okay. Okay. Are you a beginner? You can talk a little bit about UDL with your colleagues? Okay. And an expert, I'm seeing a lot of those here, that's great. Expert, ask me anything about UDL, I could lead a session. A little higher? Excellent. You're all presenting after me, I think. That's good. I can't wait to learn from you. Okay, good. So I'm on target here with what I want to share with you. So I'm going to run through some things that maybe some of you know, and just for the interest of those that have never heard about this, if you'll bear with me. So I started following UDL in 2001, and I had the opportunity to attend a summer institute at CAST in Boston. And the first thing that David Rose sent us to read was this article, which was published in 2000, called "The Future is in the Margins." And if you haven't heard David or anyone from CAST talk, they usually will tell you a little bit about their history, which started out in 1985, 84, 85, when they were a core of about 5 folks working with students with learning challenges. And back in those days, the technology was there for us to use. I was a special educator in K-12 at that time, working with teachers and teaching them how to use technology in their work. And it was in its infancy. So if you've been in that field, you know how clunky some of those devices were for folks to use. But the things that we learned from working with students and working with individuals in the margins were what this article resonates. And I think it's a great piece for you to take a look at, because it's true. What they predicted a decade ago, if not more, is what we're seeing today. All of you use cell phones. Some of you, like I, probably use an iPhone. So one of the things that we see on those technologies now is a technology we used to purchase as a software tool called word prediction. So when you're texting or emailing, you have words pop up. You'll press a letter and then the word will appear and you just choose it, which is invaluable for someone, and I'm sure you have this happen too, where you're wanting things to move a little faster. Well, for a person who has a disability, who has a difficulty with a physical challenge, or they can't activate something as quickly, that was invaluable when we had to buy those things for them. But now we also can speak to our computers, we can speak to our cell phones, we can do all of those things. So the rise in what we've seen with technology, it's become very ubiquitous in everything we do, and it allows us to take advantage of things when we need them, regardless of whether we have a need as a disability. We need them because we need them for that convenience, we need them for what we're doing. Universal design for learning also has borrowed from what we know in the whole concept of just universal design, which relates to architectural development and spaces and the ways that we pull things together that way. So you've seen a lot of this in elevators, for example, where we have Braille on the numbers on the gosh, I can't talk today. The numbers on, or the letters on the panels. You see them in curb cuts. You see them in captioning on televisions, where we have all of this for people who, again, we're in the margins, but we all use them. In fact, captioning is something that's used in airports and sports bars and all kinds of places where people can't hear, but they need that kind of accommodation for just to have that access. So in CAST, their early work was to think about building on that, along with a lot of legislation that was evolving around civil rights and the Americans with Disabilities Act that we saw in the early 90s, and also built on that thinking about architecture. Was a very important premise to what we have today. And then there was all of the things that we know and have learned to know over the last decade and a half on the neuroscience research, and the fact that variability rules in any situation, which is just a wonderful thing to learn more and more about. And how many of you were able to hear David when he was here in January?
A year ago.
Okay. So he's by far the expert, along with a number of the neuroscience folks that are at CAST. But it's an important message to keep in mind, along with all of the things we know about technology and how that makes a platform for learning a much more flexible, malleable thing for us to work with. So I'm going to show you a few clips this morning. I hope I have, do you think I should move forward with this with time? I think we have time to do this. So one of the texts that, or video clips that is available now that I'm going to show you this resource later is called the UDL series, which CAST developed through the National Center back in, I think we launched this in 2011, and this particular piece is a dialogue between Dr. David Rose and Dr. Todd Rose, who was with, okay, so where's my tech person? Let's make sure we've got sound here. Can you hear that? Yes. Okay. So this is just a short clip. David and Todd are talking about the research around learner variability and the whole notion of why that's so important. So I want to kind of set the stage with this for a second.
Universal design for learning is that you can most effectively support the individual by addressing the range of systematic variability in advance, rather than waiting to know each individual one by one. There will always be that kind of variability, and there will always be a need to differentiate instruction at some level. But what universal design for learning does is say, look, there are dimensions of systematic variability, that range of predictable differences that we know in advance that the curriculum can be designed to support. That's a game changer, because what it means is that in learning environments, the teacher, the educator, does not have to carry that load each and every year in every learning environment. That we can design for it once and take that off the table to free up more time for the really high value stuff that's most essential to deep learning.
In teaching, coming in knowing my students are going to be highly variable, I need to plan for that variability, allows us to be much better as educators. It's really a lot like planning a vacation, that when you're going to go to Bermuda, you actually are really a lot better off if you plan ahead and realize, you know what, it's going to have some sunny days and some rainy days and even some stormy days and whatever. And planning at the beginning means you have a much better vacation and things work out better, rather than assuming that it's all good, I just need this same kind of shorts, just different colors every day. What Universal Design for Learning does is to give us the framework for understanding the weather in this case. Say, well, here's the things that are likely to be sources of variability that one would want to plan for. A key in that is to look at a whole instructional episode or lesson and say, what, given the kinds of weather I'm going to face, what are the barriers going to be here? How is this lesson going to work for someone who doesn't take information in well from text, for example? Is this lesson going to work? What am I going to do about that? And similarly, how's this lesson going to work for a student who is afraid to talk in front of other students? How is that going to be a barrier? How can I plan this lesson so it will work? But the key is to do that proactively. What we look for in Universal Design for Learning is creating curricula which from the beginning are supportive of a teacher. It's like packing your bag ahead with all sorts of fabulous, very different kinds of clothing so you can handle anything. So then your job becomes a lot easier.
Before we move on to the next.
Okay. Oops. So, definitely planning for a vacation or planning for a trip to a place where it's going to snow all day long. You have to be mindful of that. And you'll see my orientation to technology and what I'm going to share because I've been doing that a long time. And one of the things we tell folks to think about when they are first introduced to UDL is not get overwhelmed and kind of start where you feel comfortable. And when I started, I was working with an area of probably the what of learning first because I knew that I could transform things in how I was representing information, and I was teaching online. I started teaching online in 1997 at GW, and so I've done this a long time, and that's where I felt comfortable. I have a colleague at Virginia Commonwealth University where we've been working with her doctoral seminar and using UDL as a lens for the last couple of years. She wanted to, and she felt comfortable with the engagement side, and that's where she felt like that she was making a stronger impact. So what they were talking about is what you want to keep in mind when we think about UDL. And though UDL's beginning started in a lot of the special education research and literature, it's far removed from that now and where we want it to be and where it should be because it's an instructional framework. It's a lens for that kind of thing. And, you know, developmentally, learning it changes. I have a need to use my visual props a lot more than I did 20 years ago. I'm still only 29, but it's working for me. I use my cell phone to send myself messages and things just to, because the working memory is not quite as strong as it used to be. But the key things I want you to take into consideration at this point, and there's a handout in your packet that we'll go through several times today, but it looks like, sort of like this, and it should be something like this, which is the full, what we call the UDL guidelines. But the core three pieces of the UDL understanding is based on three ways of thinking about learning across neural networks. And CAST began thinking about this in their early work and trying to qualify and what that means. So on the left-hand side, and I think this follows along with your chart, and you can just kind of make some notes, there's what we call the recognition networks, and those are in the pink. And those are what we have in the kind of the back of our brain. And those have to do with how we make sense of things we recognize. So when I travel to foreign countries and I don't know the language, of course, I'm looking for pictures because I don't read the text. And I'm looking for things that make sense to me and I recognize. So recognition networks have to do with all that stuff we talk about with the what of learning. And whatever you teach, how we do that. And what's key in the UDL framework is that we represent things in various ways to put that information in front of people. Because again, of the variability of learners in any situation, whether it's K-12, whether it's higher ed, whether it's on the workforce, it's all going to vary. The strategic networks, which are in the blue, are all those things in the front part of our brain. So that's the things that have to do with executive functions and how we make sense of how things go together, how we plan tasks, how we decide what's important, how we set goals. So those are where we want to make sure we have multiple ways to allow people to act and express their knowledge and represent what they're doing. And then the third has to do with the affective networks, which are in the mid part of our brain. And actually, the more recent literature, if you've been following the latest text that came out, you've noticed that CAST research has switched the arrangement of these on their guidelines. And that flows with what the research is saying, that engagement is key. That's where we should start. But for simplicity, some of us stick with the old ways of doing things because we've been doing it that way and it makes sense too. But the affective networks are what are important for us to make sure that there's relevance to why you came in here today to hear this conversation and making this connection to you in a way that gives you that choice of deciding what you can take and what you can use and not have so many restrictions around the whole concept of learning. So I like to think about that as a cup of coffee because I love coffee. I'm one of those coffee people that wakes up in the morning and I don't talk to folks until I've had my coffee. Do anybody like that in the room? So when I go in my kitchen, of course, my recognition networks are very comfortable. I'm what we want to do in UDL is become expert learners. And if you look at the guidelines, you'll look at the bottom layer, and we'll look at this again, of how we try to provide opportunities for people to become expert learners, all of us, whatever situation that is. So I'm an expert at this. I know where things are. I know what I need to find in my kitchen. I know where it exists. Someone who comes to my house as a guest and starts trying to do this on their own. Have you ever had that happen? Where is this? Where is that? They don't know those things. So I have to scaffold their understanding for just a little while before they figure that all out. The strategic networks are in play there because I know how to do the correct sequence of making coffee. I know how to pour the water first. I know how to do all of the pieces that make sure that the coffee is going to come through that coffee maker the way I want it to. And then the affective networks are in play when that coffee aroma comes to my nose, and in this case, it's one of your great coffees in Baltimore. And I am happy that I took the time to get there. And I know that routine. And that's what we want to help any learner understand in our classrooms, for being able to say when they leave, I got the content, but I also learned how to become an expert learner in doing that. And each of us, depending on our discipline, have different ways that we make that work. All of you are going to have a different take on this, and that's what makes it so rich. In 2008, the Universal Design for Learning Language came out in the Higher Education Opportunity Act and defined for the first time really what we talk about with UDL. And there's universal design has been mentioned in earlier pieces of legislation. That is not UDL. It has some connection, but it's not UDL. So again, this just reiterates what I just said about those multiple approaches to reaching students. So I wanted to run through a couple of things that I think are important for you to keep in mind, and some of you may know this work. But UDL was also mentioned and has been mentioned in a number of pieces of policy, and reauthorizations of several different pieces of legislation right now are getting letters from our National UDL Task Force and others to say, don't forget about UDL. You know, this language needs to be here. It's important. The tech plan that came out in 2010, which is a wonderful piece of literature to look at, talks about UDL specifically and emphasizes, as you can see here, the use of technology to promote personalized learning and participatory learning. And it is used as a framework that can benefit all learners. So David Rose was actually invited to the table when they were putting this piece together, which was wonderful. As someone who's followed UDL for a while and did their doctoral work in UDL in higher ed classrooms, I was also intrigued when I was doing my research at this other piece of literature, which is actually a decade of work on how people learn from the National Research Council. So if anyone seen that? If you haven't, it's a great piece to look at. But what they talk about in there also is in this particular report, and they complement one another so marvelously because they're saying the same thing. And it strengthens, in my mind, why UDL is so important, because it lays out a framework that makes good sense. And it enhances what we all want to see happen in getting that deeper learning to happen in what we're doing. Another report that came out in 2012 from the National Research Council is this one on education for life and work. And they again confirm these particular areas as critical for students to have, for individuals to have in education and the workplace to be successful in what I think many of us are striving towards trying to do and what we're aiming for. Cognitive skills, focusing on critical thinking, information literacy, reasoning, and so forth. Developing expertise through deeper learning requiring months or years of sustained practice and benefits from guided feedback and that metacognition that we want individuals to have. Transfer that is facilitated by instruction that helps learners develop deep understanding. And then curriculum instructional programs that support methods that include multiple representations of concepts and tasks. So again, that same thinking and trend of what we're trying to do through a UDL approach, I think are very complementary. So this is also a little dated, but this was in 2013, a report on the use of technology by teens. And how many of you have teens in the room? So you see this every day. This is my almost 10-year-old nephew, who since he's been 3 has wanted every device I've had when I'm with him. So I gave him my iTouch when he was 4, and he's now, you know, expert on the iPad, has his own computer, and what they're going to bring to the classroom is going to be amazing as to what we see today, because today we're working with the millennial students that came in, and we knew this was going to happen. But this just reconfirms that whole notion of why technology is such an important player in what we do with instruction. John Seeley Brown is another author I encourage you to take a look at. He has written quite a bit for EDUCAUSE, which is a great publication that comes out of the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiatives work, which are the folks in higher ed that are very interested in technology and learning, and at most universities are instrumental in why you have those kinds of supports. But his notion was that, you know, we need to encourage and continue to provide opportunities for that participatory learning, and this great growth of social media that has happened since 2005, 6 maybe. I think Facebook debuted around then. And look where we are today. I'm sure if I took the time to interview all of you, we'd be across the board, all of us using at least 2 or 3 of those things. But they are important to leverage when you can, and what they can do for you in encouraging that kind of experience. And then another report I want you to take a peek at and keep watching is what we call the Horizon Reports. And the Horizon Reports, for those of us in technology, learning, and higher ed, come out every January. And they kind of are they're a group of representatives from lots of different organizations that kind of give us a trend forecast of what's coming. So this was 2015. So in 1 year or less, the types of technology that we will see evolve are bring your own device to classroom. So you probably are seeing some of that. And the flipped classroom, which is not new, but really rising to importance. Mid-range trends are maker spaces, and don't ask me to tell you what that is just yet, and wearable technology. So a lot of that we're seeing. Apple is getting ready to come out with, I think, their watch pretty soon. And then long-range trends, which I think is exciting. Adaptive learning technologies. Who knew? Here we are with that shift that we forecast was going to happen, and the Internet of Things. So there's a great deal of information in these reports. I encourage you to take a peek at them, because they'll tell you more about where these play into instruction and how they can really enrich what you do. So this was something some of you have probably seen. This came out in 2012. David Rose had a chance to be at a wonderful conference in Boston called The Jobs of the Future, and students at the center of that conversation. And this was something that came out of a piece that he wrote, in the fact that we are at a place where UDL is critical because it reinforces student-centered learning. And it gives us that opportunity to emphasize the special purpose of learning environments, and to require the means of learning to be something that we can think about in a more flexible way, so we can reach that variability of learners. So we're going to go across this several times, but you may want to take a look at this again. And there's another handout in your packet that's a great resource that came out of your colleagues here in Maryland. It's been used across the country, and it's a do-it-yourself guide that you can actually, if you're one of those handy people, you can take and put together into a wheel. But it gives you, on the front page, it gives you a little better breakdown of all the types of examples of strategies that would cross over what I'm going to talk about here. But this is what we call the UDL guidelines. So again, you have those color codes that walk across the networks of how we think about learning. So the pink has to do with the what of learning, the blue has to do with the how of learning, and the green applies to the why. And we look across those as the pink referring to representation, the blue as action and expression, and the green as engagement. And if you look down across each of those, you'll see there are 3 areas for each guideline. So for example, under representation, we think of providing multiple options for how someone's going to perceive information. So for example, offering ways of customizing the display of information. So again, what I do, because I use technology a lot, I build classes in Blackboard, and even if I teach a class that's face-to-face, I always have a Blackboard portal, if you will, a space, because it's actually a great way for me to build that I can use it again the next time I teach, and it becomes a repository. But it also provides me the option to have that as a flexible area that I can go into and make changes when I need to for a specific class or for a specific student, but it gives them that flexibility to have access to that. And I can use something that I've put in Word for a student who may want to magnify something, who may want to listen to it through their cell phone, who may want to have it in a different format that I'm not aware of. And I don't have to deal with why that happens. It's there. They can take it. And that's a good thing. So these are all the different guidelines that I'm going to show you some examples of as we go in a little deeper. So keep that close by. Let's see, what time do we have right now? Just to be mindful of that.
1:05.
Okay, I need to keep going. I'm gonna pass that and just keep going here. So why UDL? Because the goals of UDL, as you heard David and Todd talking about, what that allows us to do is to think about providing a structure that is going to meet the needs of anyone that comes in my classroom. Because I've got that opportunity to say, okay, I've got things ready in a flexible way that I can pull from. And it takes time. If it's something you've never done, you start where you feel comfortable and you begin building there. But once you've been doing this for a while, it's amazing what you start to see things and how you see things differently. One of the things that we talk about is firm goals and flexible means. So it doesn't mean that we change or water down anything in the curriculum. It means that we maintain that rigor and we maintain the same things that we're doing in the types of goals that we're focused on, but it gives us the permission to say, but I want to make sure that I can address those various ways that I'm teaching, those various materials that I'm using, and the types of assessments that I'm providing. So this is from the latest text that came out in 2013, published in 2014, which is the UDL Theory and Practice. How many of you are using this? Excellent. Okay, so great thing about this text, just like the first one that came out from CAST, it's online. So you don't have to buy the paperback piece if you don't want to. And I use this, as I mentioned in my classes, because I can have students read just one chapter that might relate to something we're talking about in a particular course. Or in my UDL course, we use this as a main text. What they've done with the online version, as they've done with their prior text, is they've made it very UDL focused, with the opportunity for you to have scaffolds built in if you need those, to have the chance to have multimedia to share the message in different ways. So I'm going to walk you through some of the first steps that I was involved with in my course at GW, as Jane was sharing with you, and kind of give you an idea how this has evolved. So when we started looking at UDL at GW, I was a new doctoral student, and every new doctoral student always wants to find things they can do that relate to their future dissertation, right? So this was something that I could begin to start working with, and we got one of those opportunities to debut an experimental class, if you will. It actually had a different title when we first debuted it, but The Disability Support Services Office also was working with this partnership grant through Ohio State. And so the opportunity to apply for one of these grants came up, and it was a Faculty Administrative Modules in Education grant opportunity. So several of us on campus got these grants and took them to transform our courses. Now, I was working with Blackboard at the time and still had my course there, but it was probably pretty limited in what I was really using. So I took that opportunity to really add more variation in the ways information was represented. So I added more PowerPoint files to my lectures and to my course materials. I added more audio files. I added more video. And YouTube, in fact, I don't think was really as sophisticated as it is today. So we've come a long way in what we can do with technology. And I was able to use some of the technology tools that I was aware of and resources to model accessibility in that course. So that's kind of how we started using UDL at GW. And we were talking about this last night. I don't know if any of you ever taught a class where you're put in a classroom that's a fourth of the size you need. That happens in higher ed all the time. So that's what happened at GW. So they knew that I was going to utilize technology, but they put me in a room that was about as big as from these two tables put together, you know, and computers all the way around the room. But we filled it, and the energy was there and the enthusiasm when we made the most of what we could. And it wasn't that we had to have technology, because that's not the message that you should walk away from here today. You should walk away from the fact that UDL is a framework, and it should be a lens for you to plan what you do, is why the guidelines are in your packet, and why that purposely is there as an example for you to say, okay, I'm going to go back and think about what I'm doing and analyze what your approach is. So that the course that we had at GW in 2003 blossomed and went through a couple of changes. We eventually got it cross-listed in both special education and teacher education, which was where it should have been to begin with. We've had, over the last 13 years, we've had a number of students from across campus take the course, which has been great. It's still sponsored through the department, typically of special education and teacher ed, but we've had folks from adult learning, we've had folks from the museum education program, because it again applies to any situation. And the last 3 years, we've been offering a completely online version of the course in the fall, which has been a new experience, but a good one. And I'll show you some of the ways that I've used technology to support that. So as I mentioned, when CAST first began their work with UDL, the first textbook that came out was this one called Teaching Every Student in the Digital Age. It's still online. It's a great text to look at. However, the newer text, which is this one, really emphasizes the message that we want people to walk away with, and that is we're focusing on building that learner expertise in anyone. And I like to always bring this into any situation I'm teaching, because I think a class I'm teaching right now at University of Richmond, the students had never heard of UDL. They're all in general education classes. It had never been something they'd seen, which is, to me, a crime. But they understand it as soon as you share it with them, because it makes sense. It's a practical way of thinking about how we're developing the instruction that we provide. So then I was, when I was working on my dissertation in 2007, I actually was at 2 universities, one in the Northeast and one in the Mid-Atlantic. One was a public institution, one was a private institution. And I worked with about 180 students using a survey to look at the work of these particular exemplars at that time, which there weren't many around the country, who were using UDL. And I had 10 faculty. And so I looked at what was happening in those classes, and then interviewed also students as well as surveyed them to see what made a difference. And these were just a couple of the comments that came out of that work. I don't have time to show you all of that today, but what was happening with those faculty at the time, and these were faculty that were representing a variety of disciplines, they were using PowerPoints. They were including those in their classes. They were using varied experiences in how they were teaching and learning. They were taking students out of the classroom for authentic learning experiences. If they were in the sciences, they were using all different ways of using visuals on a whiteboard, in ways that they gave information to students. They were using notes and handouts to give to students ahead of time so they'd have that ability to kind of anchor their understanding. So these were things that were important to the students, and these faculty were also using online education at the time to supplement some of their work. We still see this coming up in the literature, which is great, along with a lot of other great examples that people are doing in their classrooms. I also, in 2009, partnered with a colleague at Virginia Commonwealth University, and there's an article I think I have on the UDL Connect that was published in 2012 that's a result of this research. And we looked at her graduate course that she took the UDL Lens across, which was a research methods course, which is a hard course for a lot of students, and usually one that they tend to not want to pick as their first option of an elective, or in this case, required. So we worked with her course in an action research study to take a look at how that was working. And these were some of the things that happened in that process. And she was working with a syllabus, a very traditional syllabus that many of us have always used, that's basically very text-based, and had, fortunately, a well-developed syllabus that she could pull from. So she took that and kind of looked at the fact that it had clear goals, that the professor was already using rubrics in her scoring, which was wonderful, that she had used some graphic organizers and ways to display and represent information, and that Blackboard was something she used a little bit to support her class. So this professor took that and dissected the syllabus to think through how she could consider again those three areas across UDL, the what, the how, and the why. And thinking along those guidelines of how can I think about how I'm representing information in multiple ways. So that's kind of the focus that she did in looking across the syllabus. So for example, for those of you who may not be able to see this in the back, the first item here says compare and contrast quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method approaches to research. So she was focusing on those first two, in particular, verbs of compare and contrast, in line with how she would be thinking about presenting information. She also considered her goals across those three UDL principles. Again, thinking about these objectives and how she would break that down and think about infusing those new ways of doing things. So some of the things that she did went from a standard syllabi to using Blackboard in more creative ways. And these are just a couple of screenshots, but I do this as well, where you organize your material by class section or weekly session in a folder where everything's contained within there. She also added pre-class, always had the PowerPoint posted, had notes that she'd put together that could be there for students to review. She also started using a lot of video clips from YouTube that related to the students' interests, that were contemporary videos that they could make a connection with, but brought them into the context of what she was teaching. She used not just technology, but this, you can't see this as well, but this particular image on the bottom here is actually a, what is that, melamine? Melamine. Remember, does anyone remember melamine? Yeah. So those plates, so this is a lunch tray, and what she did here is she dissected this to represent the different parts of putting a research article together. So I know you can't see this as well, but one represents the literature review, one represents the actual results, and the article that I have posted on UDL Connect goes into great depth about this, so you can read more. But what she did at the beginning of every class is she'd bring in that tray with examples of different food groups that people would remember for those parts of the research design. And it was a way for students to practice and anchor their understanding of the terms that they were using. What happened with this course over those 4 semesters is that she started working with engagement and kind of changing how she was using her approaches there, and each semester would focus on one of those 3 principles of UDL. And the class started to grow, and students started to clamor to get into her class, and the responses on evaluations were amazing by what students found meaningful for them and what they were learning. So I encourage you to take a look at that article. It was a great success story to see. So again, here are those guidelines, and if you look at your guidelines again, there are at the very top, just looking at the representation area, we look at providing options for perception. At the bottom of the pink area on the left, we look down at the 3rd guideline, which is providing options for comprehension. So there's actually a way of thinking about the kinds of things we're doing here, where the bottom line of guidelines are focusing on where we get to those richer areas of really looking at building expertise in learners. And if you look across the top, one of the ways that some of us look at these guidelines is the ones across the top kind of lay a foundation, if you will, to make sure that we have a really solid platform to grow from. So those are important to reflect back on. So let's start and just kind of dissect those a minute. I'll show you some of the things that have been successful in how we do this. So multiple means of representation. These are some of the things that I've done and others have in higher education when we think about those 3 areas. So multiple ways of representing and delivering instruction. I just showed you my colleague's class. I often use a variety of ways of teaching content, and I may have a lot of digital ways of doing that. And as I mentioned, I'll have a digital course piece in Blackboard, but we use all kinds of manipulatives in class. I have students in my Universal Design for Learning class, when they're trying to anchor what those concepts mean on the first day, I'll have them go on their lunch break into the Whole Foods next door and kind of go through the aisles while they're getting their lunch and think about what that means and come back with some ideas from that experience. We'll use the elevator in the GW building and have them, by the end of the week, go down the elevator, which is about, I don't know, 5, maybe 30 seconds, and have an elevator chat and have them share with another person what UDL means to them. So there's lots of ways with active learning and ways for them to understand what that means. I try to maximize digital opportunities to give that flexibility. If a student needs to have something translated, they can do that pretty easily by using an online translator if I have my information in a digital representation. I use hyperlinks in my syllabi. I use hyperlinks in other texts that I have that allows me to link to an unfamiliar term. So I may link to a dictionary if I want to have it defined. I may link to a website that I want them to go to get a better understanding of something that they've probably never heard of before prior to the course, so they've anchored that knowledge. I use visual models, I use concept maps, and I use guiding questions and key points, which I'll hopefully show you in my inside of one of my courses. I use a format typically in my class that helps them to find information, so it guides their way of finding that. So here is one of the courses I taught for GW, and on the left-hand side, I've got information chunked by course information first with the announcements, a start here area, which is what's open right now, and in that I typically put a place to share my philosophy about teaching and learning, give a orientation to best practices, in this case for online education, and things they need to be familiar with. I give them a list of terms that maybe they're not familiar with, so they'll have an idea of what those mean. And then I'll usually have links to resources that are on campus that they can get to. I have all of my weekly sessions kind of grouped by folder, and in each folder I have guiding questions and usually resources that we're covering in the class, and any PowerPoints that I've used and places to archive that. And this again is an example of using different kinds of models and big pictures. On the left is a graphic that I used for actually a midpoint in a class where a student was having trouble making sense of where we were. So I used the announcements in Blackboard to post this as kind of a summary for the week of what was happening and where we were headed with the next big picture as a way to represent that. And on the right-hand side is a what I call a getting acquainted big picture synopsis that I do for each week. And in that's just a Word document, but I use the same format and kind of give them a sheet that they can print out to kind of give them an idea of what we're going to be doing. And so it goes over an overview. It gives them a kind of a pointed, bulleted list of what they're going to learn. It gives them an idea of the purpose of what we're going to be covering and what the assignments are. So they'll always have that kind of readily available. I use a lot of different ways, again, to represent information. So still use those flip charts in the room and mark all over the boards, and try to get technology-enhanced classrooms, but that's not always an opportunity. How many of you have heard of Vokies? So a Voki is an invaluable tool that's free. Voki is voki.com. Allows you to go into the web and either type your message, record with your voice through your computer microphone, or you can dial in on a telephone number that you're assigned and call in your message. And what happens is you end up building an avatar that you think represents what you look like, and that avatar then becomes your talking head for your lesson. I used this when I started teaching my UDL class online because I wanted to include a sense of humor, and I wanted to have something to represent things in a different format. So this is both visual and audio. But even more importantly, what I type in as far as the message that I want to say, it's usually just a welcome message. Welcome to week 1, we're going to be covering these points. But I can also build a transcript. So I can take that text transcript and add that underneath the avatar. So I've got representation for lots of different learners who may need that information for whatever reason. .sub is another great resource that we've been using in our class for a while. They have been kind of one of those grassroots organizations that take video and provide closed captioning. So not every video that's out there is in that collection, but a lot of great ones are. And even though you can use closed captioning in YouTube, it's not as perfect. Sometimes it says a lot of different things, but we're getting there. So those are two things that you can look at. And TED Talks, which are wonderful video clips, also have closed captioning. So multiple means for action and expression. So just to tell you a little story, I used to, as I mentioned, work as a vocational evaluator, and I still do some of that. And I was working in Fairfax County Public Schools for 13 years. And 7 of those years I was practicing with that work. And I had a number of kids who would come into a room about this size that we had, which was our assessment lab, and we had work samples around the room where they would come in and have a chance to explore careers and have a chance for us to assess their skill level and their aptitude and interest. And I had all types of students, and every disability that there is usually came through the door. And I had a young man at one time that I was working with that was about 16 years old and much taller than me and a very large guy. And he was working on a work sample in construction trades. So he had to build an actual wall frame that stood about this high. So he was using hammers, nails, measuring. And he had to measure out as a first step in that task. With my instructions, he had to measure out a certain amount of measurement on the tape measure. And I would give him an instruction. For most of students, it would be, measure up to 12 inches and put your mark. And then do this and add this. And I watched him, and he was just adding things in his head. And to read about him on paper, which is what I did in my work, I'd get all of that kind of psychological information and aptitude tests and achievement tests, which most of the students failed at because they had not done very well. It was a barrier was there for them in being able to be successful. And I started talking to him and asking him to tell me, and I just started giving him numbers to add in his head. Well, he had an expert capacity to do that well beyond anyone I'd ever seen. And the point of that is that usually these students would come into this lab and show us an intelligence that was never shared on a piece of paper. But they could show us in a different way what they could do, and they did things in an amazing way. And I think that happens in a lot of situations with students that we get in classrooms that, we don't always know everything that's going on. You can't see that variability in every situation. And it's so key to be able to reach those ways of how we represent information. So one of the things on your guidelines under the blue area at the very top is thinking about physical action. And they talk about assistive technology in there as one of those guidelines. And that, for some people, that starts to think about, well, that's for students that may have particular special needs in that area, but any of us can have days where physical action is just not working as well as others. So the ways that we represent and give people the chance to show us what they know are so critical in thinking about that. So again, I give students varied ways in how they complete projects, and I've been doing that since we first started this class at GW. So I rarely, if at all, use tests. I usually have papers or projects for students to put together and apply their knowledge, which is oftentimes a very difficult thing for folks because there's a lot of information that needs to go into those. We use scaffolds and prompts in ways for students to learn and gradually understand concepts. I use rubrics throughout my classes for each assignment. I give ongoing informative feedback throughout, and I give students clear goals and objectives up front from the very beginning. It's in the syllabus, but it's reiterated in every session. So one of the things that David Rose has published in an article some of you have probably read that he published in 2006, which comes from his course, he talks about how he used to allow students to join him in providing note-taking. So he would ask for volunteers, and if you take a look at this article, he's got some great examples in the back that show what that looks like, because everybody does things differently. So in this example, you've got a student who had put the notes together in a very chronological way with text and using a word processor. And on the right-hand side, you've got a very visual, very graphically designed way of representing notes. When I was teaching with my colleague at VCU last year in a doctoral seminar, one of our students opened up Google Docs and began taking notes at every class. I mean, it's just what he uses. And of course we said, well, that's great. Well, he ended up building a portal for us for all the notes. We didn't ask him to do that, but that is the anticipation a lot of times, that students come in with that technology expertise, and it's, again, very ubiquitous in what they do. They don't think twice about using those tools to do things. So how many of you have used a live scribe? So really great tool. And at Virginia Commonwealth University, they have these in the bookstore. I'm not sure if they have them here, but they should. You can buy them at Target. These special notebooks are designed to work with this pen, which is looks like a pen, acts like a pen, but actually is more than a pen. It has a camera inside and a recorder. So it works in tandem with this notebook. And if I press at the bottom of the notebook page, you have these dials that say record, pause, and stop, playback speed, and volume speed, which interact with this. So I'm going to press the record button. You should hear a little ding. And I'm going to start writing my notes. Today is March 6th, and I could be writing other things. And I'm going to stop and turn off this and go on to my next class, just to give you a simulation. I go home, and I have these notes here, and I put my today is March 6th. So I put my pen wherever that text is on this page, and those notes come to life. Now, this is not a good example, but what's important to note is that a student, and I've had students come in my class with these because they're aware of them, go, can I use this? You know, I can't, my channels don't work in my head that way. I'm not an auditory person, and I'm not either. I'm a very visual person. I need to be able to keep track of what I'm writing. And then not only can I have it available here, but when I take this and plug it in to my computer, I also can access online through LiveScribe a digital space to bring all those notes in to a container, if you will. So it becomes a space that you as an instructor can also build a spot where you have all those notes. But it's a great resource for students who just need to have that to play back and to listen to as they're reviewing. We used this tool when we were doing some research with a project in Jamaica last year, when we were kind of listening to teachers talking about a project with UDL, and we recorded their conversations with their, of course, their approval, and we have all those in a notebook. So we were able to use it in a research way as well. So again, a lot of these tools and approaches that we do have, as they should, universal appeal for lots of different situations. And I apologize that I'm moving quickly, but I know we're pressed for time. So all of this, by the way, I will post on the UDL Connect site so you can get to this whole presentation. I use rubrics. I use scaffolding in my rubrics. I scaffold through digital ways in articles. I'm sure all of you use track changes in Word processing. I mean, we've been using that for a while. Of course, I use the comment feature in there, but those are all important. Recently, on the right-hand side, that's a picture collage. In the course I'm teaching at University of Richmond, we're in a very small classroom that has a spot for me to hook up my computer and a flat screen on the wall, but that's about it, and a whiteboard. So we can move the tables apart, which is great, and we have 7 students in this class, a small one, but it's a nice dialogue, and we break it apart and really, you know, get into some rich conversation. But what we're doing, this course is on curriculum design, and we're, you know, teaching those different pieces of, we're using understanding by design as one of the lenses that we're using there, as well as UDL. But what I've been doing is I have a Blackboard space for the course, even though it's face-to-face, and I've been taking cell pictures as we go through the 2 hours, and then kind of put those in a collage as a recap visually of what happened during the class, so that it's there for students to kind of go back through, along with notes that clarify what we've been doing, which has been very successful. It's a different way of thinking about how to represent that information, but it's working for them. On the left-hand side is what my colleague that I've taught at GW with, the UDL course, is what's called a sort. So the green sheet that you see there is actually a table that was created with 9 cells to complement the guidelines. And then the guidelines are filled with each of the names of the guidelines and then cut apart as pieces. And so when students come into the class, we have a week-long face-to-face institute, and the rest is online in the summer. They have to put that together. So they have a little plastic bag that they come in and they grab their sort, and they go and put it in order as to what's important and what goes where. So it reinforces that knowledge again in a different way. But they love it. And it just gets them into thinking about different ways, again, of how they reinforce their information. Of course, the flip charts on the side are some of the examples of things we do across the week. And I was reading through some of you that are in the UDL professional learning community with Dr. Berkowitz. You're great. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. But these are some of the things I think some of you are using, and these are just a sampling of things that we can use in ways for students to represent their knowledge. I've been using WordPress for students to develop reflective blogs in classes that I teach, which has been very successful because the Blackboard tool has a blog feature, but it's a little plain, if you will. And I think students, or at least my experience has been with students, they want to have a chance to be expressive. And WordPress gives them that freedom to pull in the kinds of things they want, to choose a theme that really speaks to them. And when they start putting things in an online format, they really get excited because they're sharing more broadly their information. It doesn't mean that we discount the need for them to write academically. I mean, I reinforce that. They still have to use the APA format, and they learn really quickly that writing on Facebook and writing on this blog are not the same thing, which is an interesting learning experience up front. But WordPress as using that as a reflective space has been really invaluable. On the right-hand side, this is a free wiki. This one was called, I don't even know if it's still around. I used it in the early days, called PB Works. PB standing for peanut butter. pbworks.com, and I built lots of different wikis in that for ways to use a tool, free, as a way to represent information. And then I'd tell students, if you're going to choose to develop instead of a paper, you're going to decide to do a digital project for the course, you want to use something, use PB Works. You still have to satisfy the goal for the assignment. You still have to write a scholarly piece, but you can do it your way. And the work has been amazing. I'll show you a couple of those in a second. Some students choose to use YouTube. They're very comfortable in that space, and they have to do a very nice documentary if they're going to do that. Some students, as I mentioned, use the Google tools. Some people use VoiceThread, both in instructors and how they present information, or for students and how they represent it. So those are just some of the examples of ways to do that. This was a student I had in 2009 who, for her project in the UDL course, this is the PB Works wiki. So this was her wiki in, they have 2 or 3 different projects they have to do, and this was partly used for one of those projects. And her final project, she built a video, which I think I can open up here and give you a taste of that.
The UDL classroom. What is UDL? Hi, I'm a teacher. I'm here to tell you a bit about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. UDL is an educational theory based on brain physiology that proposes that educators, in an effort to maximize learning, strive for 3 kinds of flexibility: the presentation of information in multiple formats and media, the support of multiple pathways for students' actions and expressions, and the provision of multiple ways to engage students' interests and motivations. UDL embraces the idea that A, there are many ways to learn and that learners differ within, that B,
So you get an idea. Over the years, what I've found in using technology in teaching and learning has been that A lot of students, again, as I mentioned, I'm sure you've seen this, come into your classroom with a capacity for using these things. But what they don't know how to do is to build them in an educational way that really speaks to what we want from a scholarship perspective. So that's one. So they, and we've addressed this more and more in our classes, they don't know that if I put a video up on my website or I put an image up on my website, that you have to credit the source. They don't know that when I pull a PowerPoint into here, or I put a video up here, that it needs to have some type of captioning, whether it's a transcript or closed captioning, it needs to be there. So that's been a great aha opportunity to work with them, as well as my experience over the years in working with even technology folks at universities who are gifted in working with technology coordination, but they've never had the instruction about working with people who may have special needs. So, you know, there's legislation that says you have to make things that way if you're going to put them in web spaces. So it's always a good experience to use those things. So that was her example, which was one of our models. So then there's multiple means of engagement, and again, I'm going to use this as my third example. And I also, again, use WordPress in this case because it gives students a chance to really have relevance, to know that they get to make some choices here. They get to customize it the way they want to. My colleague in the research course, one of the things that she does and has done in that class is she surveys students 2 weeks out before the class starts to get an idea what it is their interests are for research. What is it that they're going to research? What are the kinds of things they're wanting to dig into? And pulls those particular examples in her articles that they dissect in class. So students see that she's paying attention to them and their interest. You know, seating and pulling things together in flexible ways also engages dialogue and gives you that opportunity, but there are lots of different ways to do this, and those are just some of those examples. These again are some examples of reflective blogs of students that I've had. And then I'll just give you a quick story about this. This is a classroom that I've been working with a colleague at VCU on, that we started with colleagues in Jamaica in the beginning of 2014, that kind of came out of a conference we presented on UDL and teaching and learning, and they were very interested in wanting to bring that to their country. So we were very fortunate to have a chance to go down there last year, and we're still working with them. This was actually built in WordPress. And VCU has been one of those universities that's really pushing a lot of online learning, but what we found this to be was, again, a very flexible platform, because these folks said, in our schools, engagement is key. That's where we really need to work when working with our students. Our students are getting into, mostly the boys are getting into a lot of problems, a lot of behavior issues. So when we started focusing in on exploring UDL with them, engagement for them was the first thing we started focusing on, and we used it as a way to get an idea of what this meant to them. So next week I'm actually going to the UDL IRN Summit. That's going to be a national conference in Mississippi, and we're going to be sharing some of this. So you can go online and see that if you want to read more about it, the results that we'll be sharing. As I mentioned about the course enrichment, I'm using UDL in this particular class as well, and this is a great tool. And I saw you look at your watch, so I'm going to hurry up. How many of you heard of this? I just learned about this year. This is a great resource for formative assessment. So we use this at every class. And I know it's kind of hard to see this, but on the left-hand side, we're in a technology lab, and what you do is plickers.com, you go in and set up a free account. And you end up having these cards that you can print out that have what kind of reminds me of a QR code. Everyone know what those graphical designs, and they become about half the size of a sheet of paper, and they have the alphabet across them. So in your online assessment, you build your questions that are multiple choice, and then you bring in the people in your class by email. And you post the question online, and students then pull up their cards and answer with their response, and you use their cell phone to record their answer, which pops up online, which is free. Clickers, which are wonderful tools, are a little more expensive, and they're not as easy to always come by. So this you can use on the fly right in your class. We use it at the beginning of every class for students to review what they're learning, and gives them a chance to learn to use this as a tool in their own classes. They love it. These are those creative spaces I mentioned earlier. Choice option, anyone use Wordles in your classes? Students love those as ways to show what they're learning and to represent their information. Are we getting to the close to the end here? Okay, let me get to one thing real quick. So this is a resource I want you to go to. This is called UDL on Campus. It came out last summer. This is a compilation of things that we've been working with through CAST efforts on UDL and higher ed. You'll see a list of institutions across the country that have been doing this. One in particular are those folks in California who have been doing a great job with UDL, and I want you to make sure and look at their work. They've got a website called UDL Universe, and you'll see examples of how to think about your syllabus and how faculty have recreated their paper-based syllabus in different ways, using great ways of representing information and stories of how they've done these types of things. There's examples here from CAST on how to think about ways to put your class together, but there are also things from across the country, so a great resource. So let me see, I think we're done. So in your packet, I'm going to leave you with a task. This is what we did with my colleague's doctoral seminar when we took a UDL lens to it. We took the guidelines and went through each of them and tried to think about what we were doing and how did we represent and how did we do what we said we were going to do. Your do-it-yourself pieces give you some examples of what that looks like. So that's just kind of to guide you in that knowledge. I'm sorry I ran over, but I get excited about this, so thank you.